Hello, and welcome to BitThink Bermuda with me, Christina Story. This is one of the first video recordings I've ever made, and I have been wanting to record for at least a month. But as the title of the video says, I got distracted by Bitcoin while wanting to start broadcasting about Bitcoin. This first video is introduction for me to this whole exercise of actually making videos as rudimentary as they are and uploading. And it is dedicated in the first instance to Mr. Daniel over there at BitStuff. And I am taking the opportunity to talk about something that I had briefly through Skype chat discussed with him. And I think it's a good place to start for me because I want to talk just a little bit about this book, which many of you may have seen, many of you may have read. If you haven't, please do. As somebody with 20 years training as an academic historian, I have to say that Dr. Harari's book actually made me laugh out loud, and 4 times even, which is rare for a piece of academic writing. But the insights that he has in this book with regards to the power of our imagination are a set of insights that inform, for sure, all of the ways in which I look at the emerging crypto ecosystem 3.0, everything, the discourses around money, the discourses around politics, democracy, culture, you name it. I think that if we take a little bit of a closer look at some of the things that he's talking about, it becomes clear that while we might point to the fact that things are simply made up, as I saw a Fox News analyst refer to inflation simply being made up, we mustn't discount it. In fact, what we need to do is sort of step back in awe at precisely the power of our imagination, particularly our collective imagination, and understand that all of the scientific and semi-scientific and pseudo-scientific and downright symbolic analyses that we bring to much of the space of cryptosphere, much of the space of the analog world, and everything else in between is governed by the power of the imagination, so that ideas and art really do have an impact, and that if we understand technology and software and code to be yet another iteration of imagination that derives precisely its power from collected belief, then we are well into the way of maintaining a kind of metaframe for listening to the perspectives of all kinds of other imaginations out there, and understanding how we ourselves participate in the creation of new and impactful analog experiences through our imaginative process. So, the starting point for Dr. Harari's book and the primary framework that runs throughout it is his emphasis on the implications of what he describes as the cognitive revolution, which he understands to have taken place somewhere between 70 and 30,000 years ago. And as anybody who's been interested in the evolution of human language, the evolution of math, the development of complex human societies, the tools that emerge out of the cognitive revolution are the ones that give rise to the capacity for human beings to, for sure, migrate properly and successfully out of Africa, to start to properly colonize and shape the ecosystems that they encountered, still as hunter-gatherer groups, and certainly allowed for the capacity to start recording and transmitting memory and knowledge through both oral storytelling and the beginning of written records. And one of the things that Dr. Harari really emphasizes is that without the capacity to create shared imaginary structures, there are all kinds of elements of human development that simply could not have occurred. And that has to do with what appears to be a hardwired capacity for forming intimate, trust-based relationships with only a limited number of actual other human beings. 150, 200, the numbers sort of range. But the idea is that in order to have any kind of system that develops beyond straightforward barter or tribe relationships, one has to find ways to create systems of trust, and that without shared symbolic mechanisms, there's really no way to start to aggregate or network effect groups of hunter-gatherers or early agriculturalists. When we think about the power of imaginary structures, which, the Emperor Has No Clothes story is one of our most accessible kind of myths, we can see immediately that the most important aspect of a shared collective belief system is that the participants do not point out the fact that it is imaginary. And we can see this clearly when human beings go through periods of shifting their imaginary collective structures. Whether or not one is talking about a belief in a money system, which is ultimately a universal denominator, which I'll come to in a moment, or one is talking about any form of religion, from Judeo-Christianity through to mercantilism, whatever form of religion, you can see that what is key is that the participants don't point to and don't question, therefore, the collected imaginary belief, because what is being built out of these things are real life analog physical entities that impact Maslowian needs. I think that if everybody went around questioning how it is that the letter A came to be made up to be associated with a certain set of sounds, nobody would ever speak again. So we can see that moments in which collective imaginative shifts happen, you're looking at really profound changes in the culture. As Dr. Harari writes, the ability to create an imagined reality out of words enabled large numbers of strangers to cooperate effectively. This is a key part to the way in which the imagined entity called money, whatever form that has taken throughout human history, that is a very important part of the reason why money itself was imagined into existence. And it has to do with things that find real resonance in the conversation that permeates anything to do with decentralized networks or Bitcoin or any of the blockchain technology space, which has to do with how do you create trust and how do you create trust between strangers. So in the first instance, money comes into existence as a way of expanding markets beyond a limited number of barter items. It has to do with the capacity to price a wide range of goods and services in a universal denominator. Barter is a binary system, and once you start to introduce multiple goods, you start to create exchange rates that make it very difficult for market participants to in any way participate with any prediction for the future, let alone the kind of math that's involved in running essentially an infinite kind of currency exchange in your own head. So the idea that there would be something that served as a universal denominator into which the price of anything could be translated and then transferred to anything else is a really key kind of thing to grasp if one is going to start to even engage with some of the more sophisticated arguments that are made either by Austrian school economics advocates or by Keynesian economics advocates or by Goldbugs or by anybody, Andreas Antonopoulos, my hero, anybody who starts talking about money, the function of money, how it's functioning now. This is why I want to point to just some slightly longer term historical perspective on what the function of money is. And if we think about the definition of money as a means of exchange, I think it's also worth remembering the detail that that means that it's a mechanism of conversion. So without some kind of universal, symbolic, widely believed in, collective imagined denominator, it becomes very difficult for any kind of market, social, cultural, physical, to develop in any kind of complexity. I will talk more about how Dr. Harari develops these ideas with specific reference to the development of capitalism, concepts of capital, in a next video. But for this first piece, I just want to read here something that comes in the middle of the book, which says, people are willing to do such things as believe in seashells and colored pieces of paper when they trust the figments of their collective imagination. Trust is the raw material from which all types of money are minted. I think that is a key part to understanding what is happening both in the analog world, whether it's people who are looking at government debts, people who are looking at stock markets, insane valuations with insane low volatility, when people are looking at the mechanisms that inform consensus software and the role that that has in how a Bitcoin network or any other decentralized public blockchain works, that really what is happening is a crisis of trust and a redefinition of how we go about trusting each other. And part of this has to do, obviously, with the decline in certain kinds of versions of religions, be they the religion of late 20th century liberalism, or they be the religion of a belief in inflation as something akin to a scientific fact, when, in fact, Dr. Harari would argue inflation is nothing more than an expression of people's hope in the future and presumption of growth. And so while we come to terms with broken and newly emerging versions of how to go about trusting each other, it's important that we remember that certain of the concepts that we bring with us into this new space that have previously functioned as if they were scientific kinds of realities, inflation, deflation, bubbles, even such things as moving day averages and so on, they don't really apply. They don't really transfer unless we recall that those things are actually expressions of human imaginings, and human imaginings are always emotionally tinged. So I think that looking into and through this market and this space with these things in mind can make the ride even more interesting, because what we should all be truly doing is sitting back and in a way of really considering the awesomeness of the power of our imagination. So that's it for me. I am going to see how this turned out, and going to ride the wave with the rest of the people in the space who are nothing but excited and motivated by a whole series of new imaginings that are deeply hopeful and deeply productive, and definitely can distract one right away from all kinds of otherwise grinding, grim, dollar-dying, debt slave reality. So, see you on the other side.